Alpha, you gonna do the review?
Yeah.
Alright, good luck.
By the way, what movie you reviewing?
Over the top.
What?
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to NRW. I'm your host today, Rob, the movie guy, and I thank you very much for joining me here today because today's review is a very special one here for me because I'm reviewing the Stallone classic, Over the Top. And this is a movie that came out back in February 13th, 1987, so this year marks the 35-year anniversary of the film's release. And if you can't tell by now, I love this movie. I've loved this film since I was a little kid, and it seems like every single time I watch this movie, each and every time I love the film more and more and more. And I know this movie has a lot of flaws, and believe me, there are plenty of flaws which I'll be getting into with my negatives, but truthfully, I don't give a shit. I have so much fun with this movie. I love the characters. So yeah, here we go. Apart from starring duties, Stallone also co-wrote the film and also had final edit of this movie, but the key figure that I want to point out isn't the director Menahem Golan, I believe is how you pronounce his name. And if that name does not sound familiar, I'm sure you'll recognize this logo, Cannon Films. He is the man in charge of that production company, and they were responsible for films such as Missing in Action, The Delta Force, The Ninja Trilogy, and of course the classic Masters of the Universe. And believe it or not, the other co-writer of this movie is an Academy Award winner in Sterling Silliphant, who had won Best Screenplay for the 1967 film In the Heat of the Night, starring Sidney Poitier. So in the beginning of the movie, we follow the character of Lincoln Hawk, played by Sylvester Stallone, who in the film is a truck driver who is sent by his wife to go pick up their son out in Colorado, who is just finishing military school, to take him back over to California. And the reason for her request is because we come to find out that Hawk has not seen his son in over 10 years, and we also learn that his wife is also having surgery out in California due to a heart condition that she has, so she's in a pretty bad place right now. So her request to have him pick up their son out in Colorado and have this road trip back over to California to see her, she's hoping that they could form a bond and get to know each other a little bit better so that by the time they arrive in California to see her, they can be a family. But when Hawk picks up his son Mike at the military school, we learn right away that Mike wants nothing to do with his father, and we learn this because we find out that his grandfather, Hawk's father-in-law, absolutely hates this guy for whatever reason, and he's been feeding his grandson all this crap about his father being a low-life person, a loser, a guy who'll never amount to anything, someone that abandoned him at a young age, and so on and so forth. So right off the bat, this relationship starting off really rocky. And despite Mike's protests along with his grandfather, Hawk does have custody over his child, so he's able to take his son from Colorado over to California. And before I saw this film, I was already a huge Sly fan. I had already seen Rocky 3, 4, I believe I might have seen 2 at that time. I had already seen Rambo First Blood Part 2, Tango and Cash, Cobra, and I believe I'd seen Locked Up at that point as well. So when I saw this movie, one of the first things I remember specifically about this film was that I hated the kid Mike so much because, like I said before, I'm a huge Sly fan, and at the time I remember thinking I would have killed to have this man as my father because he was so nice to him. And even though this kid in the beginning of the strip, he was very disrespectful, he was very dismissive, condescending, just being a jerk to him the entire time, or at least like I said at the beginning of the trip. And I remember thinking, like, you don't deserve this guy at all whatsoever. And I remember thinking, you should be grateful this man is your father because this guy is clearly taking this time to be patient with you and being polite to you despite your rudeness. And even Mike's grandfather, who in the film goes by the name of Cutler, is finding any means necessary to bring his grandson back over to him, going as far as bringing his legal team to find loopholes so that way he can become the legal custodian of the child, and even going as far as hiring some men to basically kidnap his grandson to have them bring him back over to him. So this guy is going really out there to do whatever it takes to have his grandson back over to him. Eventually, Mike does learn to trust his father Hawk along the way, especially after that failed kidnap attempt by those men who were sent by his grandfather. And also he learns that his father is a pretty good arm wrestler who hustles on the side, earning some extra cash. And Hawk also teaches his son to drive a semi-truck as well. So they definitely form a bond along the way, and it turns out to be one of the more touching moments of this film. And then they arrive in California, and both Hawk and Mike find out that Hawk's wife and Mike's mother had passed away before they arrived there due to the complications of the surgery, I believe. And this obviously breaks their heart. Mike, in a panic, just freaks out and goes back over to his grandfather's place and decides to stay there. And then Hawk wants to go back to get his son, but they refuse him to come inside the mansion to get his son. So then Hawk forcefully makes his way into the mansion by breaking through the gate and crashing into the house quite literally. And there's a scuffle that occurs, and now he's thrown in jail. And then he's given an ultimatum. Listen, get out of California. Don't ever come back here to get your son. Sign over the legal custody over to his grandfather, and we're not going to press any charges. So then Hawk says, well, what does my son say? And then his son comes up to him and says, I don't think it's best that I go with you, because what can you do to take care of me? He's like, well, I don't have money, but I can give you a lot of attention. I can give you support and so on and so forth. And he's like, that's not going to be enough for me. So Hawk's like, okay, if that's what you want, signs over the legal documents to have his grandfather become the legal guardian of his of Hawk's son. And then he goes to Las Vegas. And this is really where the movie is changing its tone, because at this point, this movie becomes a straight up, I'm going to say it, wrestling event. And for me, this is where the film gets really, really good. This is actually my favorite part of the whole movie. Everything that takes place in Las Vegas for this arm wrestling competition is, for me, the best part about the movie. As I already said before, this movie I absolutely love from start to finish, but this is the bread and butter of what makes the film so fucking fantastic. So Hawk does eventually win the competition in Vegas, and he does reunite with his son after his son discovers that his father had been writing him these letters all these years, despite the fact that he believes that he never did. He comes to find out that his grandfather had been hiding these letters, and for whatever reason kept them for his grandson rather, to find them pretty easily. So anyway, so they get reunited at the end of the movie, and they decide to open up a business together, a trucking business called Hawk & Sons. And that is pretty much the end of the story right there in a nutshell. So now we are here with the parts that I want to talk about the most about this movie, because there is so much that I want to cover about the positives, but I will be getting into that later. But first, let's cover the negatives. For me, one of the major sticking points of this movie is the relationship between Hawk and his father-in-law Cutler, because we don't know why Cutler has such disdain towards Hawk. We don't know what it is that Hawk had done to give him this impression that he's this low-life loser that's never going to amount to anything, that he was not good enough for his daughter. So we have no idea what caused this in the first place. And outside of that minor exposition of what I just explained right now that we hear from Cutler, we also come to learn that despite the fact that Hawk did leave the family, because a lot of it has to do with Cutler being the major issue causing that wedge between his daughter and Hawk, even after all that happening, Hawk's wife still receives this letter, writes him letters, calls him, sends him a picture of their son. So obviously he was still good enough for her to have a relationship with him despite the distance and despite her father being a problem. So there's a plot hole about what's going on with that relationship that never really gets explained, how they're still able to communicate with one another despite the fact that her father has a problem with that. And then we also come to find out too, when Hawk and his son Mike are talking about receiving these pictures of Mike as a kid and as he's growing up, he's like, well, you write letters to my mother? He's like, yeah. He's like, how come I've never received a letter from you, not even a birthday card? He's like, what are you talking about? I've written you hundreds and hundreds of letters, and I've sent you a birthday card every year, Christmas cards, everything. You've never received a single one. He's like, no. So he doesn't believe him, because his grandfather's been feeding him all this crap that his father was a loser and that he had abandoned them, and that you can't trust a guy like that. So then later on, as I mentioned earlier, that Mike finds this bag full of letters that Hawk had written to his mother, and then also finds all the letters of Hawk writing to his son. So then he realized, holy shit, he's been telling the truth, and then comes to realize that his grandfather was purposely hiding all those letters from him. So what happened in between the time when his wife, or rather Hawk's wife, is alive and didn't notice that the letters were missing, and that his son, or her son rather, didn't receive the letters? Well, nothing of that is ever explained. So that was one of my major problems with that story. And as far as my remaining negatives are concerned, those negatives I'm going to be pointing out here were never really a problem for me at all whatsoever. As far as the cheesy acting, because there is plenty of that in this movie, some of the dialogue is pretty hammed up as well, and the choice of music can be a little bit over the top, no pun intended. But for me personally, that was part of its charm. Even though those flaws are very prevalent in this movie, it doesn't take away from my enjoyment. In fact, it enhances it for me. So I don't really have a problem with a lot of the criticism about the acting, the dialogue, the conveniences that are there. It worked for me personally. So this is going to be the perfect segue for the positives. All right, so the positives. Sylvester Stallone. This guy is a fucking genius because, as I mentioned earlier, he co-wrote the movie and he also had final edit of this film. So you know he had a lot of influence about who is going to be casted in this film, the direction of the story, and all this other good stuff that makes this film, in my opinion, so good. One of the best things that Stallone does in movies like this is that he has really good inspirational speeches where he really points out the realities of a person who is dealt with their insecurities and that they've never learned to face them head on, or that they've been spoiled, and whatever the case may be. In this particular case, he's talking with his son, telling him that he's been spoiled his whole life and that he's been given everything. He's never had to work hard to earn anything because everything's made easy for him. And then he's pushing his son to face this kid who is clearly bigger and stronger than him in an arm wrestling match, and his son is very doubtful and wants nothing to do with it because he feels like the kid can just rip his arm off, but his father's saying, no, you can beat him, let's go do it. And even though his son does lose that first match, and having that conversation with him after the fact and giving him the encouragement, you know what, you can do this and you will do this because I believe you can do it. You just got to believe in yourself. And you see him overcome that emotional hurdle, that insecurity, and it's beautiful. I think it's done very effectively, in my opinion, even though there's some choppy acting there. But regardless of that, it works so good. And Stallone, in my opinion, does that so effectively. He's one of the best that's ever done it. If you watch his Rocky movies, there's virtually a scene like that in every film where he has those powerful moments. And this is one of those examples where he does it very well. And now we can finally talk about the thing I wanted to get into the most, which is the arm wrestling competition, because this is by far the best thing about this whole movie. And everything leading up to this event is really worth the wait, because this is where you get to see the epicness that is this arm wrestling competition. I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever gone to a arm wrestling event in real life, but I've only gone to one with my brother Juan, and it was a sports bar down in Fredericksburg, I believe, and it was fun. I enjoyed myself there. But the one thing I remember specifically, that it was a very small scale environment, because like I said before, it's in a sports bar, and there was a table set up. The two guys would compete, and there was another table set up for another tournament that was occurring at the same time, I guess. And people would just crowd around these two competitors, and they would just watch in close quarters. In the movie, you have a much more epic feel to it. It almost seems like they're filling up an arena, and it just looks so grand. I don't know if they have something like to that scale in real life, but I do know that from what I have seen on TV and some clips on YouTube, that you do have something very similar to that, where you have a pretty decent sized crowd, but nowhere near the scale of this arena that they're in, because most of the competition is pretty close quarters. In fact, there's always a stage, and then people are just watching from the floor, and that's pretty much the extent of the crowd capacity that I'm used to seeing for these competitions. And in the movie, you come to find out there are divisions as well. Apparently, Hawk is part of the truckers division, and there are other competitors that have won competitions in other parts of the world or other regions of this country. And there's also a women's division. Now let's talk about the competition that Hawk's facing in this movie, because as I mentioned before, this feels like a pro wrestling event. I mean, this feels epic. And the competitors in this movie, they all look like pro wrestlers. They look very powerful, very strong, very intimidating. So I know for a fact that Stallone had a lot to say about who he wanted the actors to play these parts, because in order for you to sell this whole David and Goliath story, you got to get somebody who is really powerful looking, really intimidating, and will more than likely scare the living shit out of anybody who dares to cross paths with them. This is by far one of the best things about this movie too, because the competitors in this movie really sell the competition. And a lot of the competition that Hawk faces, they all have names that sound like pro wrestlers. I mean, you have names such as Mad Dog Madison, Smasher, John Grizzly, and his arch rival, Bull Hurley. And a lot of these guys also have these crazy antics that psych themselves up in preparation for competing, where they're getting slapped across the face or they're slapping themselves in the face, they're drinking oil, eating a cigar. I mean, just crazy stuff that makes this so much fun and so epic that how can you not enjoy this stuff? And one more positive I want to get into before I do my rating is in the actor Rick Zumwalt, who plays the arch rival to Hawk in Bull Hurley. This guy is one of the best things about this movie. He definitely has that it factor, that intimidation factor that's required for this movie, because when you first see him, when he walks into the frame, he definitely has that it factor of like, holy shit, that is the top dog. That is the guy to beat. That is the guy not to fuck with. And he also has some of the best lines in this movie, especially one line where he tells Hawk, "You ain't got a prayer in Vegas." Love that line. So unfortunately, this man had passed away, I believe, back in 2003 due to a heart attack. So rest in peace, Rick. But he was by far one of the best things about this movie. So on to the rating. So if you can't tell by now, I love this movie. I really do. And as I said before, the more I watch this movie, the more and more I love this film. And I know there's some flaws, but like I said before, I don't give a shit. This movie is fucking awesome. So for me, I give this movie a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts on the movie. And if you have seen this movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And also be very curious for anyone who has never seen the film, and if they've watched this review and this at least piqued their interest to check out the film, I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on the film in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also hit that notification button as well too. And be sure to share and like our videos as well. And also make sure you follow us on our social media accounts as well. We have a Facebook and Instagram page at New Release Wednesdays, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow myself on my social media accounts on Instagram, Rob_Medina0585, on Twitter, RobMedina0585, and on Facebook, simply just Rob the Movie Guy. And until next time, everybody, thank you very much for joining me here today. Stay safe out there, and remember, cheers.